All right, I've now started the recording and informed the group that we are recording this session. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lisa Corsetto. I'm a policy manager at the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, or JPAL, and I work as part of the Jobs and Opportunity Initiative team, joined by many of my colleagues here today. So now that I have introduced myself, we would love to know who else is in the room. So if you feel comfortable doing so, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, just so we can know who else is here. So I'll give folks a minute to go ahead and drop in the chat who you are and where you're coming from. We'd love to know who else is here. All right, great. Thank you, folks, for entering in your information. This is great. Welcome. Great, and please continue to introduce yourself. We're so thrilled that all of you are here. And we're just really excited that you've joined us for this information session as we launch the Jobs and Opportunity Initiative's African Scholars Program. So to give you an overview, next slide, please, Vitwa. Great, and thanks. Please keep those introductions coming. So to give you an overview of what we'll cover, I'm going to kick us off with an introduction to JPAL's Jobs and Opportunity Initiative. We call this initiative JOY for short. I'll share about the methodology of research that we support and what types of funding opportunities are available. Then I will hand it over to Dr. Edward Asidu of the University of Ghana Business School, who has been really successful in securing research funding from JPAL in the past and can share his experience participating in our existing African Scholars Program and share his advice for others who are interested in applying for this funding. Next, my colleague Amy, who manages the African Scholars Program for another JPAL initiative, the Digital Identification and Finance Initiative, or Digify in Africa. This was really our inspiration for JOY's African Scholars Program that we're launching. Amy will share application tips based on her experience reviewing applications in the past. And then I will share more information about next steps for people who are interested in applying for funding through this program. And then at the end, we're going to open it up for Q&A for anyone who has questions. So you're very welcome to drop your questions in the chat box at any time. Otherwise, we'll have time for your questions at the end as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and kick it off with an introduction to the Jobs and Opportunity Initiative. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Bitwa. Thank you. Great. So to motivate why we launched this initiative last year, globally, over 220 million people were unemployed as of 2020. And there are particular disadvantages for certain subgroups of the population, as I'm sure you all know. So youth on average face triple the unemployment rate faced by adults on average. And we think that unemployment can contribute to a range of issues such as low productivity, low incomes, and reduced social cohesion, just to name a few. And even for people that do have work, many face low earnings, difficult hours, unsafe conditions, and insufficient benefits. So governments and NGOs are responding with active labor market policies and private sector development reforms, but evidence on which solutions work is inconclusive, making it hard to be able to give helpful input to policymakers, governments, NGOs, others, who are making really difficult decisions about how to design their programs and policies. Next slide, please. So randomized evaluations are one powerful tool to improve our understanding of a range of phenomena, including labor markets. JPAL works with a global network of over 220 researchers who are dedicated to using high-quality randomized evaluations to evaluate the impact of social programs that are aimed at reducing poverty in some form. You may have heard the news a couple years ago when Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, JPAL's founders, and longtime colleague Michael Kremer were recognized with the Nobel Prize in Economics for their work using the methodology of randomized evaluations to advance evidence-based poverty alleviation efforts. Next slide, please. So apologies to those of you for whom this is going to be repetitive, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, I thought it could be helpful to give a brief overview of what a randomized evaluation is and how it helps us to rigorously measure the impact of an intervention. So there are many types of impact evaluations, but this is just one. So JPAL focuses on randomized evaluations or randomized control trials. And these we think are a really rigorous way to estimate the causal impact of a given program. And so the researchers in our network sort of specialize in using this methodology. So let me give just an example in a sort of simplified form what this can look like. So let's say we want to measure the impact of giving students laptops in schools instead of using regular textbooks. And we want to know what that does for student learning. And we're going to measure student learning by looking at student test scores. So we start with our population of schools. We start with our sample of schools. Next. And then we randomly split these schools up into two groups. And so kind of the idea behind doing this random assignment into two groups is that on average, if we have a big enough sample, these two groups of schools are statistically really similar. Next, please. And so to one group, we give them the intervention. So in this case, we are giving all the students in the intervention group laptops. In the comparison group schools, we don't take anything away from these students, rather they continue getting the status quo of using textbooks in schools. Next, please. And next. Okay, great. So then at the end of this period in which we've given students, at the end of some intervention period of giving some students the laptops, some students their regular textbooks, we measure the student test scores for both groups. Next, please. And so if we've done kind of our randomization correctly, at the end, when we're measuring student test scores, the only difference between these two groups is the fact that one got the textbooks and the other got laptops. And so we're able to, with a lot of confidence, say that any difference in test scores we see between the two groups is as a result of our laptop intervention rather than any other factors that might be happening at the same time. And so this is sort of the intuition behind randomized evaluations and why they're a really powerful tool when we want to know whether a specific program is effective at changing the outcome that we care about. Next slide, please. Great, so the Jobs and Opportunity Initiative, or JOI, applies this methodology of randomized evaluations to test innovative solutions to employment challenges. Our research priorities are in three main buckets: job training and matching, job creation, and the future of work. So to summarize what we mean by these different buckets, training and matching could include things like vocational training programs. How do we make that more cost effective? How do we reduce search barriers for job seekers? How do we reduce discrimination in labor markets? When we look at job creation, we look at the impact of public works programs. How do we support small and micro entrepreneurs through alternative forms of business training? How do we identify and support sort of high growth potential entrepreneurs who can grow their businesses and create jobs for others? And then the future of jobs, we can think of this as a bit of a cross-cutting theme. How do we prepare workers for the changing demands of the labor market? How do we build in protections for gig and informal workers who maybe lack access to traditional social protection programs? And how do we promote women's participation in the labor market? These are just a few examples of what we think about in this bucket. Next slide, please. So in the interest of time, I won't go into these in any detail. We have a lot more examples on our website, but here are a few examples of the specific types of guiding research questions that we have under each of these different buckets. And so again, on our webpage, we have kind of an overview document of our request for proposal that outlines our research agenda in a lot more detail, but these are just a few examples. Next slide, please. So the Jobs and Opportunity Initiative was launched last year, but we're excited right now in this upcoming request for proposal round to be launching an African Scholars Program for the first time. And so we'll discuss this in more detail later on in this session, but I wanted to clarify some eligibility criteria. So to be eligible to apply for this funding under the African Scholars Program, you need to have already completed a PhD in economics or a related field and be based in an academic institution in sub-Saharan Africa. And so our program provides research funding, which I'll go into in the next slide. And every team that is successfully awarded funding is paired with a mentor. So Dr. Edward Asiedu will speak to more his experience, what this has looked like, what that means to have a mentor. But mentors advise the team or individual African scholar throughout the project. These are JPAL affiliates who have this expertise that I mentioned in conducting and have a lot of experience in conducting randomized evaluations. And African scholars can either identify an eligible mentor before submitting a proposal, or they can be linked through the initiative after they've been awarded funding. But we'll share more about that later on. Next slide, please. And so to walk you through the 3 different types of funding that people can apply to under the Jobs and Opportunity Initiative, the first is proposal development grants. So these grants cover exploratory work related to preliminary research ideas, such as conducting background research, developing partnerships, visiting field sites, and collecting preliminary data. So the expectation is that these funds will be used to support costs related to PI travel or to develop a proposal for a pilot or full-scale randomized evaluation during a subsequent call for proposals. So the maximum amount that people can apply for in this bucket is $10,000 US. The grants for pilot studies are for studies that have a clear research question, but for which the design and implementation requires further testing and pilot data. So the expectation is that these projects will ultimately develop into full-scale randomized evaluations, but you need to do some initial work first before doing that. And so the maximum amount is $75,000 that you can apply for this. And then for full randomized evaluations, these grants are for research projects that are at a mature level of development. Not only must the research question be clear, but applicants must also demonstrate a commitment from implementing partners, a method of randomization, well-defined measurement instruments, and sample size estimates. And so the expectation is that these projects will result in a publicly available paper that is eventually submitted to an economics journal. And these can be up to $400,000. And I'll note that in order to be eligible to apply for a full randomized evaluation, African Scholar project teams will need to first successfully complete a pilot for that same project that's funded by JPAL. So if you're looking at sort of applying for the first time, I would narrow in on those proposal development options or the pilot grants. Next slide. So let me give an example of a randomized evaluation that has been supported, funded previously by the Jobs and Opportunity Initiative. So this study took place in Dandora in Kenya, an informal settlement outside of Nairobi, where many people lack the savings to sustain them for weeks or months without working. And so this was kind of in the context of when lockdowns were beginning during the pandemic last year. So researchers tested the effectiveness of delivering cash grants to female microenterprise owners during the COVID outbreak. The grant was equal to around 1 month's profits. And so to rigorously test for this using a randomized control trial, a randomly selected group of female business owners received this cash grant, while another group, nothing was taken away from them, but they didn't get access to this cash grant program. And what they found when they measured the impacts of this and compared the 2 groups was that the women who received the cash transfers had higher profits, spent more on inventory, and spent more on food. They were also more likely to reopen their business, which potentially goes against the goal of reducing contact to limit the spread of the virus. So an important question is whether investments in PPE, protective gear, and precautionary measures also increased. And they found that these safety measures only increased for those entrepreneurs who perceived COVID to be a major health risk, but not for those who didn't. So the researchers who led the study suggest a need for policies that complement these cash transfers, such as information campaigns about the pandemic and effective mitigation strategies. So enabling small business owners to stay afloat without compromising public health. And so this research project tests the types of things just demonstrates the types of things that we can find out through these randomized evaluations. So now that I've shared an example and an overview of the Jobs and Opportunity Initiative, next slide, please. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Edward Asiedu, who has participated in JPAL's African Scholars Program through the Digify program, which Amy is involved in leading. And Edward is a development economist with interest and considerable experience in the design and evaluation of pro-poor policies and interventions. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Göttingen in Germany, an MA in economics, and an MSc in ag economics from the University of Guelph in Canada, and a bachelor's of science from the University of Ghana. He is currently involved in 3 projects that use digital tools to improve the well-being of the poor in rural and urban Ghana. And he is also involved with the World Bank to better understand how digital innovation adoption can improve SME performance in Ghana. So Dr. Asiedu currently teaches impact evaluation, development economics, development finance, and labor economics at the University of Ghana Business School. I could talk for quite a bit longer about Edward's many accolades, but I'd rather let him speak himself, as I know he'll have really helpful insights to share with others who are interested in applying for funding through the African Scholars Program. So Edward, let me hand it over to you.
All right, so greetings from Accra to all of you, wherever you are listening from. Here, I think Lisa have just gone and talked about myself, so I'm not going to do so much.
Oh, Edward, we can't hear you very well. Could you speak a little bit closer to the mic, please? Thank you.
Hear me?
Let's see. Go ahead.
Can you hear me
again? Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you.
All right. So I said greetings from Accra to all of you, and I'm happy to be here to share with the team my experience with the program and also my experience with doing field work in Ghana. Okay. So I'm currently based at the University of Ghana. Next, please. I wouldn't go much into the background. I think Lisa has done more than enough on that, so I'm not going so much into it. But in general, I'm a development economist, and I like to design interventions that tries to address some of the bottlenecks that the poor faces. So in Ghana, you look at some of the challenges that the poor faces: access to pensions, access to credit, access to health insurance, low productivity in small firms. So basically issues that you can use randomized control trials or experiments to better understand some of the solutions, the possible solutions that we can scale up. So that is kind of my interest. So I try to walk around and see what the issues are and then think through whether or not we can design interventions that can address them. Next. So how did I first learn about JPA and the African Scholars Program? I had a project, it's still ongoing, some years ago with IPA. I know some of you may know them. And this project was trying to pre-finance tractor services for farmers in Northern Ghana. So this was an ongoing project with IPA. And I was invited by the IPA country director at the time to meet JPA because we were just starting the Digit5 project, and they had visited Ghana to explain what the project is. So similar to the activity we are having today, just to explain what the program is and what their goals and objectives are. And so at that meeting, interestingly, I met some of my current co-PIs on the project that I'm working on. And we knew each other from the university or even in Ghana, but then meeting there, we could easily identify and know what we can work together and what we could think about. People had ideas and we began to form teams. So I want to believe that maybe after this program, you can identify people that you can work with to apply. All right, next. So just to give you guys a quick background on some of the things we are working on with Digit5 and other JPA projects or programs. I'll talk about 2 Digit5 projects and then 1 Joy project, which I'm a co-PI on. So the first project we call Leveraging National Identification and Digital Payment Systems to Nudge Informal Pensions Contribution. I think those in developing countries or in Africa, you know that pension coverage for the informal sector is very low. And so our idea to think through what are the challenges, what are the problems, and think and try to partner informal pension companies to see if we can expand coverage to the poor. So that is what we have. I have the treatments. I'll just briefly mention the treatment. So in one treatment, we have the use of national identification cards as an added layer of confidence to nudge enrollment and contribution. The challenge was that a lot of the informal pension companies that exist in Ghana, the identifier or the ID cards that are linked to the system is just mobile phone numbers. So you buy the pension on your phone, but you don't have any social security number or social insurance number attached to it. So it doesn't give people a lot of confidence. So we have a treatment that we try to add people, let them know that their Ghana card or Ghana national ID card is being linked to their program. And then we have a second treatment 2, where we use voice messages to remind people in their local language, to remind those who have enrolled about the flexibility. So what we saw in the data was that some people will enroll, but then they will stop payment. Or when they have a crisis, say COVID struck, and then they have lower revenues, and therefore they just stop payment. But they didn't know that there were indeed flexibilities embedded in the system that you can pause contribution, continue contribution, change contribution. So we are testing whether highlighting these flexibilities will nudge people to enroll and also stay on it. So we can test it these days. And we had controls, and then we have combined treatment. But for the pilot, for the Digify, we are not testing the combined. We are testing the standalone treatments that we have. All right, next. For the second project, which I'm a co-PI on, the first one I'm the lead, the second one I'm the co-PI on this project. Here, we are trying to also solve a problem in terms of health insurance coverage for the poor, and Ghana has introduced the biometric national health cards, right? So here we also have a reminder system. The challenge is that a lot of people will also enroll on the national health insurance, but they simply forget to renew their card just before it expires. And when it expires, you have to wait. There's a waiting time of about 3 months before you can get back on. So there are challenges with the renewal, and also there are challenges at the hospital level because people are not renewing, so resources coming to the hospitals are lower. So we have also a voice reminder 2 weeks or 3 weeks before your card expires. And another treatment that we thought could work will be basically switching everybody's renewal rate to a particular month, okay, or a group, so that I know that, okay, come January of every year, I have to renew my card. Okay, so we have a treatment where we are going to pay to move people's renewal rates to a particular month. And the baseline for these projects are all ongoing. We have a control, as Lisa said, the status quo, what is being done now as a comparison. Okay. The last project I'll talk about, next please. The last project I'll talk about is the Joy project. This project, I'm also a co-PI, is led by Francesca and Ashley from Northwestern University, and myself and Monica from the University of Ghana side. And here, basically, the idea came from the COVID pandemic, right in the middle of the pandemic, or the beginning of the pandemic. We were thinking about how to support female businesses in the middle of the pandemic. So this is similar to what Lisa was talking about, showing the banana seller. So our initial plan was to actually give cash grants to female businesses and see how they are able to overcome the effect of the pandemic. But we didn't get so huge a grant to be able to do that. So what we did was that, okay, how do we bring female businesses together to collaborate to impact themselves? Okay, so we brought female businesses that apply to a group for support and to a platform like a WhatsApp platform. And then we nudged collaboration and we nudged networking. So people were talking about their challenges, the businesses they do, they post pictures and videos of what they do, and then they find collaborators. And we are finding very interesting results. People are collaborating from the north of the country to the south, providing input, and some retailing the final output. So interesting collaborations. We haven't estimated the impact, so I cannot tell the exact impact of the treatment. In another arm, we had the legal support, where another group of female businesses were trained on how to sign contracts, how to partner people, the legal issues that are related to foreign business. We had another treatment that we didn't test at the end because the initial pilot, the power was so weak. which was giving female businesses like mental, psychological support in the middle of the pandemic, but we were not able to test that. Maybe we can do that later on someday. But these are some of the 3 projects. Okay, next. African Scholar Mentorship Model. So once the grant was given to us, right after we were assigned to a mentor. So for each project that I was on, one that I was leading and the one that was a co-PI, we had a mentor, different mentors for them. And so we had a mentorship meeting, our expectations were discussed, and then the mentor's expectation of us was also discussed. But I like the idea that the mentorship started right at the beginning. And so that was very helpful. The mentor helps to shape the ideas. Even though we already knew what we were doing, we had partners from Ghana who were on the different projects. For the pensions, we had a private pension company, and for the national health insurance, we had the National Health Insurance Authority itself in Ghana. So, but then we had to refine some of the ideas. So the mentor came in very handy. The mentor makes input into the survey instruments. We send a survey instrument, qualitative, and we all discuss, and then let him or her understand the setting a bit, and then he or she will also help you to think through the design. Okay, so in one of the projects, the good thing is that once you build this mentorship, it's not just for this project, but also maybe career-wise. So what we did was that other projects that we had ideas of, we could bounce those ideas off our mentor, even though it's not about Digify, we're still writing proposals in other settings. So we just bounced the ideas, and they were very, the person we approached was very, very helpful and gave us very good comments on our personal projects that we are, or RCTs that we are trying to design. So they'll help you, the advantage is that they'll help you think a little bit about your experimental designs. Designing an intervention is not so straightforward because there may be a lot of confounding factors, and therefore you have to think a little bit about the randomization process, and so that the effects that you find are indeed effects from the intervention that you designed and not other factors that you didn't control for, that are also changing as you change or as you randomize, or change it after the baseline. So these are very important issues that they help you to think through. Also the power issues, the sample size issues for different treatment hubs, some of the things, type 1, type 2 error issues that they help you with. Yeah. Next. Tips for applying for the research funding with JPA. So we've gone through this, so I can give you guys a bit of feedback. We can always discuss after this, but just some pointers. Okay. One, I think the first thing that you have to do, which is the heavy lifting you have to do, is try to understand the problem that you plan to solve as soon as possible. And here, by engaging stakeholders in the sector, early, as I said, the pension companies, the health insurance company, discuss also your initial ideas with the stakeholders so that they come on board quickly. Find people you can easily bounce ideas off. It's easy to design an intervention sitting in your office, but it may not work. Just talk to people. Go to the market settings, talk to the random people. They'll ask you simple questions about your design, and then you have to help you to rethink through them. Yes, quickly, next. Build a strong team. I've realized that when you tell people about a project, they are always happy to join, but when it comes to the writing, not everybody will be on it, and then they'll be delaying the process. So find people you can easily work with. This is very key. Engage your university research administrative office. It can take some time. So please let them know ahead of time that you are preparing for this grant and the deadline is so and so and so. The last point I'll make before I end my session is support letters from public and private institutions are important for a lot of the JPA calls. And so make sure that as you're engaging them, let them know that they are partners also on the project. Let them own the project with you from the beginning. So kindly plan ahead. All right, I think that's all time will permit me to talk about. We can always discuss at the end. Thanks so much for.
Great. Thank you so much, Edward, for that great presentation. And just thank you for sharing some of your wealth of knowledge and for leaving your email here for folks who have questions. We really appreciate it. Next slide, please. So next I'll turn it over to Amy Hare. Amy is a policy manager at JPAL Africa, and she has been instrumental in launching and managing JPAL's first ever African Scholars Program, which has been the inspiration for this African Scholars Program that we're launching today. So Amy works on the Digital Identification and Finance Initiative, or Digify. Prior to this role, Amy served as a research associate on labor, health, and utility-related research projects at JPAL Africa. She has extensive experience in data collection and analysis, coordinating with research partners. She has a master's in development economics from University of Paris, Sorbonne, and a master's in applied economics from the University of Cape Town. And through her experience managing the Digify African Scholars Program, Amy has accumulated a wealth of knowledge that she will share in the form of practical tips and tricks for people interested in applying for funding through the African Scholars Program. So Amy, over to you.
Great, thank you, Lisa, for the warm introduction. Yeah, so I'm Amy. I have reviewed a number of proposals that have come through the Digital Identification and Finance Initiative. And so I thought I would just take you through a couple of the key elements that kind of are part of a winning proposal or a successful proposal. Next, please. Great, so these are kind of at least from my experience, the key components which would kind of lead to a successful proposal. So we're looking for a proposal that has a really strong research question, one that has some sort of pathway to a randomized evaluation, one that follows the application guidelines, and one that's sort of well communicated. So is simple to follow, is succinct and clearly written. And I'm going to go into each of these components in detail. Next, please. Great. So what makes a strong research question or research idea? I think the first thing that is important is to make sure that your proposal is academically interesting. So we really want to see proposals that are going to be contributing to the literature in some sort of way. So making sure that you understand the literature, the existing literature, and then identify how your project or proposal will be able to contribute to that broader understanding. We also want to make sure that our proposals that we fund are policy relevant. So this means that we want to be able to see that there is buy-in from partners, that it sort of can be applied to the real world, and will be helpful for policymakers when the evidence has been generated. Another component that makes a strong research idea is that it follows the initiative's research agenda. So as Lisa explained earlier, there's quite a specific research agenda for JOY. So making sure that your proposal is in line with that research agenda is really important. And then making sure that your research question is sort of an RCT-able idea. I think sometimes we get proposals coming in that are very interesting questions, but just don't sort of align well to an RCT-able sort of research question, in which case we probably wouldn't fund it. So these really need to be sort of cause and effect questions. And it kind of leads to the next sort of point, which is, next slide, please. Great. Having this sort of clear pathway to a randomized evaluation. So here I just want to kind of emphasize that there needs to be some sort of program or possible program or intervention that you're planning to run that can be evaluated in the future. So for pilots, we really need to see that there's buy-in from the partners who will be running this program. And for pilots, we need to be able to see that that pilot could lead to a full RCT in the future. For proposal development grants, it can be a little bit, it's more exploratory, so you don't need to have such a clear intervention in mind, but we need to be able to see that it could lead to an RCT in the future, because these are kind of the type of grants that we are able to give. Great. Then the sort of next component is following the application guidelines. So making sure that you're following all the specifics that have been outlined in the RFP materials. So we've linked in the JOY RFP materials there, but making sure that you are including all the components that we ask for. I think if it just helps with making sure that there's not as much back and forth, and yeah, just making sure that you include all those pieces that need to be there. Great, and then the final component that I just wanted to flag, maybe obvious, but just making sure that your proposal is well communicated. I think this is helpful to avoid the back and forth over email, to try and understand and make sure that the proposal, just to understand what the proposal is. So making sure that it's well written is quite important. So some ideas in terms of writing is to make sure that or to possibly build out a structure before you start writing, make sure the title is really clear, make sure you cite relevant literature that relates to the proposal, be clear and concise, make sure you review your proposal before submitting. And then one idea is also to ask others to have a look at your proposal to see if there are any parts of it that might be confusing to an outsider audience. And here I've just put in a couple of different resources that you might be interested in looking at. And I think Lisa will be sharing the slides after the session. So that's all from me.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy, for all of that great information and tips. So now that you have all heard from Amy and also from Edward, I'm going to recap with some eligibility details and next steps for folks who are interested in applying. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned earlier, in order to be eligible to apply for any of these three sort of buckets of research funding, you need to both have already completed a PhD in economics or a related field, and you also need to be currently based in an academic institution in sub-Saharan Africa. So that being said, only one person on the project needs to fulfill this definition. So we definitely welcome people to partner with a diversity of researchers to serve as co-PI. So Edward mentioned how he has collaborators on all of the projects that he shared about. And we think this is like a really great model. So we encourage people to apply as a team if that's something you're interested in. So I know we got a couple of questions around eligibility in the chat. So just to confirm, it's correct that if you're not at an academic institution, then you aren't eligible to apply for this funding. However, if there is someone on your project team who is eligible, then they can apply, even if other people on the team don't fit this eligibility criteria. And the same goes, for example, if you are completing your doctorate but haven't finished that yet, or are not currently in sort of faculty position at an academic institution or in a postdoc role. And again, as we mentioned, the three types of funding that you can apply for are proposal development grants, pilots, and if you have already completed a pilot for a project that was funded by J-PAL, you can apply for that same project for a full randomized evaluation. Next slide, please. So in terms of timeline, later this week, we are going to be opening up our request for proposal round for the fall of this year. Letters of interest, which are, it's a very short description of the project that you want to apply for, will be due on September 7, and full proposals are due on October 12th. So I'll note that you need to submit the letter of interest by September 7 in order to be invited to submit the full proposal on October 12th. So if you miss the deadline for September 7, you can apply for funding in a future round, but not in this round. And we host these requests for proposal rounds twice per year and plan to run these through at least the end of 2022. So we plan to have at least 2 more requests for proposal rounds after this one. So I hope that a lot of people are interested. You can go to the next slide in applying for the Jobs and Opportunity Initiative African Scholars Program funding. If you are interested, there are a few next steps that I would like to recommend. So first of all, and this is really important, is to sign up for the African Scholars Registry. This is where we are going to be sending announcements about, later this week when our request for proposal round opens and what the instructions are for that, as well as this program that Amy has mentioned on the Digify African Scholars Program, when there's funding opportunities or training or learning opportunities as well. Those will all go out through this African Scholars Registry. So I think Margaret is dropping that link in the chat right now. So please make sure you are signed up there so that you receive announcements about these different funding opportunities. And then please also check out our website, which is the second link here, for request for proposal round information that will open up later this week. So you won't see all of that right now, but that will come up later this week. And then if you're interested in applying, submit your letter of interest. This short form by October 12th, or sorry, by September 11th, so that you can submit your full proposal by October 12th. So, but that first deadline has to be hit of September 7th to be eligible to apply for this round.